Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with Essential Works by Beethoven for Beginners. How to start your Beethoven collection. And this is actually rather tricky. And the reason is simply because Beethoven was such a great composer and wrote masterpieces in so many different media that you can very easily get swallowed up. I mean, 32 piano sonatas, 9 symphonies, a bazillion piano trios and violin sonatas and other things. And so we really need to be sort of ruthless, I think, in chopping things down to size. And there's going to be some controversy here, of course. I understand that. But the important thing is that this selection really works. I mean, it really does work. I'm not kidding. It will get you started in the best way and allow you to expand at your own leisure. And that's the whole point of this. Of course, you could substitute one work for another, but I do not want to get into an argument with anybody about what should come first. There is no single key that unlocks the magic door. What you need to do is drop in somewhere and just start listening, and start listening to some of the best works. There will be always discussions about which those are. But I can tell you right away that the Third Symphony, the Eroica, which is in some respects the most important of all the symphonies, is not where I would start. And I'm saying that straight off because I know people are going to jump in and say, oh, you got to put in the Eroica. No, you have to put in the Third Symphony. It's subtitled Eroica, heroic. It's very long. It's somewhat difficult. It has some issues. Some people deny that, but it does, trust me. And it's better to approach it after, I think, you have a little bit of grounding in Beethoven's style. That's my feeling about it, and I'm sticking to it. And if anybody wants to contradict me, you're free to. I will delete your comment instantaneously because I'm not having an argument about it. So there you go. Let's get started with Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. Of course it has to be Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, the most famous piece of classical music ever written, the most iconic symphony ever written, and you need to know the whole thing, not just the opening movement, not just the part that goes da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da. You can sing it to words, This is the fifth, Beethoven's fifth. It's not the third, it's not the ninth, it's not the eighth, it's not the fourth, it's not the seventh, it's not the sixth. This is the fifth, it's just the fifth, this is the fifth. The fifth, get it? It's Beethoven's fifth, but it has 4 movements. It lasts about 30 some odd minutes. If you take all the repeats, maybe a little bit longer. That motive, bum, 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 appears in all 4 movements as a unifying factor. The third movement, called a scherzo, which means joke, it's not a funny movement at all. It's actually a very grim movement, reappears in the middle of the finale in a somewhat different context with a different emotional meaning, which I leave it to you to figure out. The point is that this symphony does encapsulate everything that makes Beethoven Beethoven. The sense of struggle, of striving, the heroic march of grand victory, which is the finale, the incredible formal concision and power and unity allied to unheard of expressive range and depth. That is Beethoven, and you will hear it all in the Fifth Symphony. And so it's a perfect place to start. And it's wonderful when it's like, the one that's the most popular really is the best place to start. It just gives you everything in a nutshell. It truly does. So start there if you don't know your Beethoven, but listen to the whole piece and listen to it more than once and take your time and get to know it and pay attention to the emotional progression from movement to movement, from section to section, from theme to theme, and how it all hangs together to create a single journey from furious darkness and tragedy to to giddy heights of triumph. It's really quite an extraordinary journey and an amazing piece of music. So after that, I'm going to go back a little bit to Beethoven's earlier period. The Piano Sonata No. 8 in C minor, the same key as the Fifth Symphony. C minor was Beethoven's special key, the key of struggle and striving. Yes, his 8th Piano Sonata, subtitled the Pathétique. It has the most beautiful slow movement you've ever heard in your life, because Beethoven was also a tremendously lyrical composer, a poet of beautiful singing melody, although he was not actually majorly a composer of vocal music. Very unusually. One of the reasons that Beethoven has become such a universal figure is that he made his greatest impact writing instrumental pieces, not writing vocal music in his native German. And so the whole universe could listen to it and be so touched and impressed by the expressive point of the music, which is so specific and so powerful that it doesn't need words, even when it sings, as it does in the central movement of this gorgeous piano sonata. You may recognize the outer movements too, and I particularly love this one because I actually played it, or at least bits of it, and friends of mine played it much better than I did. Hi, Billy. And really did a good job, and I was in love with the piece from the first time I heard it. It is a glorious three-movement, emotional extravaganza. Beethoven's best music is always an emotional extravaganza. Next, Piano Concerto No. 4. Now, there are 5 piano concertos, and they're all very good in their way. The 4th is his most Apollonian concerto. Now, if you're wondering what that means, it means it has a sort of grace, a classical poise. It's his tribute to Mozart. It does not have anger. It does not have violence. It begins with an extremely beautiful and lyrical first movement that has some incredibly gorgeous themes. A slow movement, which is astonishing. It's a dialogue between the strings and the piano, where the strings are mean and nasty, and the piano is placating and calm. And eventually they reach a sort of a rapprochement, if you want to call it that. But the piano gets pulled over to the dark side. It's very dramatic. And it's fun to hear how it happens. And it all happens in like 4 minutes. It's amazing. And then there's a really zippy finale that's just full of joy and abandon and freshness and light. It's a wonderful, happy piece of music. Not everything Beethoven wrote was tragic and miserable and had to plumb the depths of despair. Quite often, he was extremely jolly and really, really very, very, very enjoyable. But even when he's being joyful, there's a sense of profundity, of depth to what he's doing. And you really hear that in the 4th piano concerto. It's not the easiest of them all to listen to. Number 3, which is also in C minor and has that Sturm und Drang tension, that might be considered a better choice. Or The Emperor, which is more famous, number 5, which is very grand. It's a grand, grand piece of music. 4th is more, this one is more intimate. But the intimate side is an important part of Beethoven's character. I mean, in his last works, he sometimes marks the music con intissimamente sentimento, or something like that in Italian, with the most intimate sentiment. And so we need to be aware of that, and you will be aware of that hearing this concerto. Next, String Quartet No. 7, also known as the Razumovsky Quartet No. 1, also known as Opus 59 No. 1. This is a wonderful piece of music. Beethoven's string quartets are as important and as famous as his symphonies or piano sonatas. That's the other big medium in which he worked. And there are 16 of them. The late quartets are famous for their almost cosmic, bigness and metaphysical, profundity, if you want to call it that. But these middle quartets are the ones where he's really enlarging the medium of the string quartet from where it ended with Haydn, where Beethoven took it over. And it's a big, another joyful, very happy piece for the most part. Slow movement is quite profound and profoundly beautiful, but it's a wonderful, large work. And the important thing about these quartets is to realize that they are, on the whole, bigger in length than Beethoven's symphonies. The fact that something is chamber work, that is chamber music, doesn't mean it's small. In fact, it's a medium for many composers to experiment and to characterize and create some of their grandest formal structures and biggest visions, unconstrained by what in those days would have been great difficulties in writing such large works for orchestra. I mean, when Beethoven did his Eroica, the thing broke down when he first played it. He had to start over, and it's terribly long. It's like 50 minutes long, or, it's very, very long. So, which is why I don't have it on the list. But these string quartets are also quite large. And if you can get used to this sense of bigness with small forces, you will have made a major breakthrough in your approach, not just to Beethoven, but to classical music more generally, to the idea of classical music, which is that large forms exist independently of the medium for which they are written. The medium adapts to the formal vision of the composer. And you hear that quite clearly in this magnificent string quartet. Now let's do another symphony. Symphony number 7. Oh, wow. This is just a dynamo, a rhythmic dynamo. Every movement is based on some sort of, rhythmic impulse that just surges with electric energy. And it was the soundtrack to the Charlie Brown cartoon. It's the Easter Beagle Charlie Brown. So why not? I mean, it's just lovely, lovely music. The second movement is marked allegretto. It has no real slow movement, this symphony. And it's one of the most beautiful melodies, songs. I'm going to say it's so vocal. Most beautiful melodies you've ever heard in your life. It's extraordinary. It was so popular when Beethoven wrote it that they detached this movement and stuffed it into the 8th Symphony, which they thought could use a little bit of extra lyrical juice, which isn't true. That's to completely mistake the character of the 8th Symphony, which is largely humorous. But the 8th is really, really powerful and exciting. A thrilling, thrilling work that you will adore if you don't know it. And again, you may have heard the first movement. You may have heard the second movement. You got to hear the whole thing. Listen to the whole thing. That's the point. Get to know the entire concept, and you will be absolutely dazzled. Next, an overture. Let's do something short, a little short orchestral piece. Egmont. The Egmont Overture. It's Goethe's tragedy, the tragedy of Egmont. Oh, hello. Cat's climbing up the wall there. And the cool thing about Egmont is that it begins with a wonderfully dark and moody introduction, followed by a deeply tragic, throbbing allegro. And then there's a coda, which is the song of victory, Egmont's eventual triumph. Actually, the play dies, but the idea triumphs. So it's a philosophical triumph. It is another wonderful work, like 7-8 minutes long, that really encapsulates everything you want to know about Beethoven. Everything that he does, the struggle, the striving, the heroic, the victory, the tension, the incredible formal grip. Iron grip. It's grip. It's gripped. It's amazing. It's a wonderful work if you've got like 8 or 9 minutes and you want to get like your dose of Beethoven. Do Egmont. It's absolutely thrilling. I played timpani in it. It's so much fun. Oh my goodness, especially the first big onslaught. Ta 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 tam, ta 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 tam, ya da 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 da. I mean, the tune is just a descending minor scale, but Beethoven makes it sound like Beethoven. And the timpani going bum, like this, bum, bum, bum. Oh God, it's fun. So you will have as much fun listening to it as I do playing it and listening to it. And last but not least, and we only have 7 works here, because Beethoven you only need 7 to get started. I mean, you need less even. You can just do the 5th Symphony but it's really great because from here you can expand exponentially. And there's so many famous works that are not on this list, works with titles like the Moonlight Sonata and things like that, that I'm not talking about. But I don't need to, because you'll have all the tools you need to listen if you simply get to know these 7 pieces. I guarantee it. It's time tested. It worked for me and it'll work for you. The Piano Sonata number 21 in C major, the Waldstein Sonata. This is a middle period sonata from the same period basically as the Razumovsky string quartet and the 4th piano concerto, that wonderful period when Beethoven was fully mature and firing away on all cylinders. I mean, really just going for it, going for broke, and he hadn't quite spaced out as he did in his later works. But it also sets you up for those later works in its formal genius and in its wonderful. Oh, the finale is so beautiful. My goodness, it's so beautiful here. It's another one of those. It's in a moderate tempo, but it makes the piano sound so rich and so deep and so full. I mean, this is a work that just exudes a certain sublime contentment. I mean, I hate using the word sublime. I always thought it meant underneath lime. You know what I mean? But I mean, there's just something about this piece that is so deep and so incredibly beautiful and fulfilling. I mean, when it's over, you just feel good. You want to go back and start over with it. It's so much fun. And it's actually very interesting to hear the opening because no two pianists seem to be able to play it the same. It's da 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 dum ba da dum da ba da do da 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 ba da dum da ba da dum, like that. And you're never quite sure how pianists are going to handle the repeated notes at the beginning. I mean, it begins actually with like one note and then the rest are chords, and sometimes it's kind of blurry. It's fun to listen to different performances and see how they do it, how different the music can sound at different speeds and with different articulations. And it's just repeated notes. That's the thing that's so cool about it. You know, it's just repeated notes. But again, it's one of those lessons that we learn from Beethoven, as we did at the beginning of the Fifth Symphony, how he can take what seems like a very simple idea, and make it sound, first of all, really meaningful and completely personal to Beethoven. Nobody else had done anything like it before, and full of potential, of something that's going to become something really, really big as it goes on. And it does, believe me. That's what's so cool about so much of this stuff. And you know, these tiny details, these little details, these simplicities, these things that sound so inevitable, they gave Beethoven enormous trouble. His sketchbooks are full of reworkings and thingies and sketches and drafts and trying to bang everything into shape. And the final form is only achieved after a tremendous amount of false starts and effort and whatnot. And it's so simple and so clear that you'd think, my goodness, it must have just popped into his head fully formed. But that's not how Beethoven worked. He had to chisel it out of the block of marble that was the music that he was working with. So there you have it, my friends. 7 works by Beethoven that I absolutely guarantee will get you going. So get going and keep on listening. Thanks for joining me.